Hi guys, and welcome back, and today we'll have a look at painting some World War II Dutch infantry. So these figures are part of the First Encounter diorama, which we've already seen the purging and the tank crew for that being built, and this is the next component. We'll go into those. Great looking uniform. It was a sort of a French bluey field grey colour, and very hard to find actual colour pictures of the period, but I found a couple of good references and a reenactment site, and those guys are pretty fussy about what they put together as their kit. Hopefully I've come fairly close to what the correct colour is. Now all three figures are by D-Day Miniatures, and I've had their figures in the past and thought highly of them, and this was no exception. So we'll crack open the boxes and have a quick look at them as they come out. So some simulated live footage. They're resin figures. It's a 1/35th scale figure, of course, and there's not a lot to them. The torso, legs in one piece, beautifully moulded, like just some magnificent detail there, which you get from resin figures, but I really like the D-Day stuff. Nice folds and everything looks really good. The head, which is a bit hard to see, but reasonable detail. I'd say they're better than most of your plastic kit heads, but they're not Hornet head quality, if you like, but still quite good. Perhaps a little bit narrow, but that's very subjective, I think. And then the arms, which are also well moulded. With the resin figures, you don't necessarily get much in the way of seam lines. You might get a few moulding defects. It doesn't help if you drop them either. These come with little locator pins in the arms, which is usually quite helpful, and this was helpful for these guys. And then we've got the general, or senior officer, maybe a colonel. I'm not 100% sure what the rank badges mean. Again, beautifully moulded, very crisp and clean. Very little in the way to do in terms of cleanup, a little bit around the legs. Again, the head quite nice, still left with that feeling of perhaps slightly narrow, but not too concerned about that, to be honest. Good detail around the hat, that'll be fun to paint. And then the arm, so the left arm is holding a pipe, which is quite good, and the right arm comes in two parts, and the hand itself, and the hand is holding a walking stick or a cane. I guess he would call it a cane. He doesn't need a walking stick. And that's not uncommon in these really delicate resin parts that might snap off. And from memory, I think I tried to stick it back on, but that was unsuccessful and ended up just making a new one out of some thin wire. And lucky last is just the infantryman. And again, the same standard as the other two figures. Belts and buckles are really clean and crisp. Quite like it. A little bit of flash perhaps on the leg. More a parting line than a seam as such. Which will be a little bit tricky because he's got the leggings to navigate. And then has a slightly bent rifle, but we'll warm that up a little bit. Resin likes a bit of heat and will often return to its right shape with a little bit of persuasion. And the left arm. Again, it's got the location pin for the arm, which is quite useful. And then the right arm, which is holding the rifle, which proves to also be slightly out of alignment as well, but not terrible. And again, that will respond to a little bit of heat and persuasion. And lucky last is Bonce, and he's got the very recognisable Dutch helmet on with the crest at the front. Again, nice detail, and looking forward to getting stuck into painting these guys. So on with the filling and then the priming. And really, there wasn't a lot of filling required. There was a bit of a fit issue around most of the arms. It was somewhat minor. And I think it was probably my fault because I just assumed the pins would fit. But I think I should have drilled out the holes in the torso that was receiving them. So that meant I acted without thinking and cut the pins off. And then, of course, things dramatically deteriorated from that point on. So there may be not a fitment issue, it may be more a building issue. But in any case, I like to fill around the arm seams anyway, even if it's a really good fit, because you always still get that sort of line, which is often far more exaggerated than it needs to be. So it's just one of my pet things that I like to do. So using the Aves 2-part epoxy resin, and mix that up, and I usually let it sit for about 5 or 10 minutes just so it starts to harden a little bit, so it's slightly easier to work with. You've got a fair amount of working time with this, and it responds well to water. So with my silicone tool, you can dip that in a little bit of water and get the excess off if you need to on your finger, like we always do, and then you can just smooth it in and even manufacture a couple of little crease lines in there. So I find that works quite well. And all up, this doesn't take very long. For the 3 figures, I think I might have spent half an hour at the most in doing the filling and making sure I was happy with how that all looked. The thing I like about it is you can smooth it in with the silicone tip tool with the water, and you effectively don't need to come back and do any sanding, which means you limit the chances of doing damage to other parts of the model in the cleanup. So I typically use the grey Vallejo surface primer, but in recent times I've been adding a little bit of black to it just to darken it up. On grey resin or plastic figures, the grey paint, it's often hard to see where you've been, so just having it slightly darker just makes it easier to see where you're going. So this won't last very long, and I'll come back in a tick. So I basically used 2 colour references, and this is an actual uniform from a museum, and I believe it's a genuine uniform, and that was helpful. And then the second picture here is reenactment uniform, which again I think is very helpful. And in reading the text in the description of the uniforms from the reenactment site, it sort of helped me to get a sense of what colours I might need to mix together to reach that affair. So this was interesting. I wish I could give you a detailed explanation of exactly how many different colours I used and how I ended up with the final colour, but I originally just gave all the figures a undercoat, I guess, of the French blue, which was quite darker than the reference pictures I had, or the box art pictures as well. It gave it a good base for me then to start experimenting. I love the priming in the undercoat because it always brings up a lot of the details, and also gives you a chance to check your own work in terms of the fitment and the filling, that there's no residual issues lingering around. Now, mixing up the paint was a bit hit and miss. This is some German field gras highlights. So I whacked some of that in. Bit of thinners. Some sky blue, because fundamentally I'm just guessing. So I can't give you a detailed description. There's a couple of drops of that. I was just trying it out on the packaging, on the box art. So that was a bit pale, so I put in a little bit of slightly darker blue. And I think you get the gist. It was very much hit and miss. Thought it needed to be lightened. Bit of white. And a bit of grey. Bit of dark grey. And it's sort of getting a bit closer. I have to think about that for a while. A little bit more sky blue in there. It's getting even closer. Bit more field grey. Although I think it's the grey actually. And that felt like it was pretty close. So I just dried off a little bit with the airbrush, which I think is what I was doing before actually. And then came in and sprayed it with the airbrush to see what that looks like. And I think that in my head was about as good as it was going to get. Very, very close. Hopefully that comes through in the video, but it is very, very close. So on with the spraying, and I tried to come in from a downward angle, which I was hoping would just give some natural shadows in the places where there should be some natural shadows. I find this is good in theory, but I don't think I've managed to really ever get the result that I thought I should get from it, so I still need to do a little bit of work on that. I think subsequent coats I just go over where the shadows should be anyway, so theoretically it's a good idea, but in practice I haven't managed to pull it off to any degree of competence at this stage. And then I carefully stored what was left of that Dutch blue paint because I knew I'd need some later on for touch-ups. So if you've seen my videos before, you know this process. I call it blocking in, and it's just getting all the major colours in the right place. Moderately careful but not fanatical, knowing that I'll come back again at least 2 or 3 times doing detailed painting and touch-ups and fixing up little blemishes. So try and minimise the work for yourself by being careful, but I don't get stressed if I can't stay in the lines. I'll give you a rest from my voice because you've heard far too much from me so far. About 4 minutes of calming music while you watch this bit, and then we'll get back into some explanations. So on with the detailed painting now, and this I find very, very difficult to film because my eyes are genuinely rubbish, and I've got my 8x magnifying lens spectacles on, and the figure is not far away from my nose. So some of this film part won't be as good as it actually turned out because I'm operating from a distance a bit further than I would normally do. And in fact, I normally look like a passed out drunk when I'm painting this because I slump across the desk so both my arms are flat on the bench and they're not hanging up in the air like this where there's lots of movement. So look, that's what works for me, but it doesn't film very well. So just getting the brass colours in here, being pretty careful. This is a triple O brush, and just having a look, making sure I get the sides and the likes, and then working on the buckles, etc. on the belts. And here I'm just giving a very light dry brush with the metal finish on the helmet just to get some shiny spots on the highlights and a little bit of scratching appearance around the edges. So again, this is with the triple O brush and it's virtually got no paint on it at all. So going for something very, very subtle here. So onto the flesh, the faces and the hands. And look, using the wet palette, so slightly diluted from straight out of the bottle, just so it spreads a little bit easier and thinner, because otherwise, if the paint's too thick, you just get build up and it looks pretty crap. It looks pretty crap when you look at it close up. It doesn't really look too bad as you get from a distance. And then just progressively lightening the paint with a little bit of white, and looking to pick out some of the highlights. But I like to wet blend, so I don't like those stark contrasts between highlights and lowlights. So it is pretty subtle, and I don't know if the camera picks it up all that well in playback. I can see it, but I know what I'm looking for. So just picking out areas like the nose and the cheekbones. I left a pretty dark wash in the eyes. And then again with the same paint and adding in a little bit of, I think, leather brown, to get a slightly darker tone, and then just looking to place that in places where there should be shadows, so under the jawline and under the chin, in the ears, a little bit under the nose, and then the trickiest part of all is the eyes. Now, this will look rubbish because I'm normally just about kissing the damn thing when I do this, but anyway, using the triple O brush just to get the off-white into the eye sockets, and again, I try and be careful, and I'm usually much better than that, but I'd rather have more, because then I find it easier to come in when that's dry, and you've got a better look at the eyes, so you can use the narrower pointed brush to clean up the excess white and then get the flesh in and then get the eyeball in. So look, I know there's raging controversy over whether to paint eyes or not. I think in 1/35th scale you've got to. Do they look a bit glassy? Yes, certainly they do sometimes. Interestingly enough, if you have a look at the picture right at the start of this video, the colorized one of the Dutch guys in uniform at the machine gun, I think they're all a bit glassy-eyed as well. Maybe it's a sign of war. Maybe it's just the way things are. And one final thing that I thought was worth mentioning is that sometimes for detail you don't need to go with the double O or the triple O brushes. This is a number 3 brush, but it's brand new and it had a magnificently sharp point on it. So I used this one. I actually used this to clean up around the eyes and put the eyeballs in, and then went on to use it to do the buttons and the buckles and the like. And I think it works actually better. So I've sort of gravitated between triple O and larger numbers for the details, but it's all about the point. It's not the length or the size, as we all know. It's how you use your point. So we're into home straight now, and just prior to putting any filters on them, I gave them a nice gloss coat, just with the Vallejo acrylic gloss paint, and that always works quite nicely. And the main reason for doing this is I'm really happy at this point usually with the overall detailed painting of the figures, and I just want to protect that, whether I'm using an acrylic wash or in this instance I'm going to use a combination of oil paints directly and some oil washes for filtering, and you just want to make sure that they're well protected, because if it all goes pear-shaped with the use of oils, you can always carefully take it off and preserve what's underneath it. The gloss paint will protect that. Without it, you can start to run into some serious issues. So my gloss paints are nothing special. I just picked them up at an art and crafts supply shop, very cheaply actually, but they seem to do the job. So here I mainly wanted to focus on I'm calling him the general anyway, to give his coat a slightly richer, higher quality look about it. So using a very soft brush, almost similar to a dry brush technique where I get most of the oil off, but remembering oil is a much more adhesive sort of paint than the acrylic, so even though you think you've got most of it off, there was still quite a bit that went on, but that didn't really worry me all that much. So sort of randomly putting it on and knowing that some of it will get into the creases, and that's fine. This is really not the stage that looks very good. This is the stage that looks pretty crap, but getting it on and then using a little bit of white spirits, some odorless solvent, so I can use it inside and it doesn't cause any dramas. Again, getting the vast majority of that off the brush and then using that to just blend it in. And you'll see as we go along here that I do many passes of this because I want it to be relatively subtle, but I just want to give that coat of the general's it's come from his tailor, it hasn't been issued from the quartermaster's store type arrangement, and it's just a matter of going back in over and over again really with different clean brushes all the time, just to smooth that paint around and get it nice and thin and evenish. I'm not too worried about the dark blue collecting in the low lights, because when I actually put the diorama together, I'll be doing some weathering with some pastels, and that will take care of all of that. Now here, just doing a wash, so again it's a fairly diluted mixture of the blue oil paint with some white spirits, and again I'm using that partly to help spread the tone around, so this is really a filter rather than a wash. And again, once that's on and then dried, a matter of going back in and cleaning up until it reaches the desired effect. And here I'm just using the airbrush to blow any of the surplus liquid away from the model, so I don't want anything pooling, and I found this works really well. Try and blow it always in the same direction, then a little bit of clean up with the brush afterwards. And there's just a comparison between the quartermaster's issue and the tailor's issue. So the rest is just more of the same, just to get a little bit of, variation in the black jacket for the other officer, and a little bit of discoloration in perhaps some of the more heavily worn areas. So we'll leave you in peace for a minute, and then we'll come back and look at the last bit. So that's pretty much it. I'm just going to have a very quick, not a tutorial, about cleaning my airbrush in between colours, and then that'll only be for a minute or two, and then we'll come back to do the final reveal. So it seems like a few of you guys must have got airbrushes for Christmas, because I've had 3 different people ask me in the last 2 weeks how I clean in between colours. So I just use isopropyl alcohol. I spray a bit of that in and shake it around. Then I do a bit of reverse blowing by putting my finger over the nozzle and pushing down the trigger, and then tip that out and then spray out the rest. Another couple of sprays. So this doesn't use much. And then once I've got some more in there, I get a cotton bud or a Q-tip and just give a bit of a poke around the nozzle, being careful with the needle, so you don't want to exert a lot of force, just gentle force. And a bit of a swoosh around on the inside. Tip that out. Then I go in with a little bit of paper, soft paper cloth, a serviette, and that generally gets the vast majority of it out. Squirt a little bit more in there and get a paintbrush in to get right into the crevices and underneath the shaft of the needle where possible, and just give a bit of a scrub around the needle again. So that's pretty clean. Just spray a little bit in there and then squirt it through. And I like using the isopropyl alcohol because I can just spray it fundamentally anywhere and it dries up in a matter of seconds. So it doesn't make a mess. It's not like you're tipping water out everywhere or spraying water out into a bucket or anything like that. And then if you're still having some issues, it might be there's a little bit of paint stuck on the needle. So very easy just to whip that out. Now you've got to be careful of the needle. You don't want to damage it. And you can see here there's a little bit of sky blue, that French blue paint still stuck on the needle. So again, bit of a squirt with the alcohol spray, Q-tip in there to give that a rub. And don't think for a second this isn't a dangerous occupation. These things are sharp and you can really stab yourself if you're careless. And then carefully back in. You don't want to bang it on anything. Do it all up. And then one final squirt and just onto some white paper so you can see. And that is pretty clean, ready to receive the next colour. So how long does that take? It takes about 60 seconds, and it's well worth the exercise. And that's it. So we'll do a couple of laps of the magic spinning machine and some still photos after that. But really happy with these. Are great figures and really happy with the way they came out. I think they'll fit into the dio really well. So sit back and enjoy a little bit more music, and then a final farewell from me right at the very end. Cheers! So that's it, guys. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it and hopefully maybe got a couple of bits and bobs out of it. Really had a great time painting these figures, really enjoyable, and looking forward to pushing on with this first encounter dio. So for those of you who have persisted and got all the way through, I am about to open the box on the Tamiya 1/35th scale Panzerkampfwagen 2 Ost F/G, and that will be the what ends up being the burnt out tank in the scene that we're putting together. So again, thank you so much for watching. Really do appreciate your time. As always, all the normal YouTube stuff, like, subscribe, ring the bell, share. Most importantly, from my perspective, really look forward to your comments. I hope you're all staying safe and well and looking after yourselves, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.